Talked about Type 2 games, and then
Type 2 fun, yes.
Type 2
you want me to
fun.
talk about Type 2 fun again?
Let's talk about Type 2 fun for a minute.
All right, I'll talk about
this might be an actual show at some point, or might do a whole show right now. I don't know. We'll see. This is totally flying by the seat of the pants and the beard.
Perfect. Yeah. So hikers and other outdoorsy types and exercise types have this notion of type 1 fun and type 2 fun, right? Type 1 fun is the kind of things that people normally classify as fun. I went to a party. I, hung out with my friends. We did some dancing, like I had a good time. And they would tell people after the fact that they had a good time. But then they all have this different experience, which they call type 2 fun, which is, I was slogging through the mountains and we almost fell off the side of the cliff and it was raining and it was miserable. And I've never had so much fun. After the fact, they tell everyone, I've never had so much fun. It was so great to go and like slog through the mountains. And so there's this notion of like, there's things that aren't fun in the moment, but when you recall them to yourself and when you tell people the story about it, you say, oh, that was great. I'm glad I did that. I wouldn't trade it for the world. It was amazing, right? And they call that type 2 fun, even though it was kind of miserable in the moment. And we just had a friend, Paul, friend of the show, who was playing 10 Candles, and I had mentioned that it wasn't usually my cup of tea. Like I got to be in a very, very specific mood for something like 10 Candles, and I think it's because the 10 Candles brings this kind of type 2 fun, right? It's like,
but see, I don't see like 10 Candles. No one is in the mood for 10 Candles. Like no one is in the mood for 10 Candles. Like it is can be some very dark shit, and probably is some very dark shit, and yet is an experience that you're not going to have with pretty much any other thing. Like it does the thing better. Now the problem I somewhat see with type 2 fun is it can verge severely into disaster tourism.
Right.
Especially with tabletop games. Like it's sort of like type 2 fun can be it has its own problems, because you could say, oh, I had a lot of work was terrible, but we really, we got through it, and we had good times, like good times, and
we had solidarity, and like
yeah,
we made it through, and
it's
I don't know. I mean, sometimes people are in the mood for a tragedy or a horror movie, right? Like some people are like, oh, it's time to like do something loaded with negative emotions, right? That like, okay, we're gonna watch, King Lear, or we're gonna, watch a horror movie, or we're gonna do something like that. I don't know. I think sometimes people are in the mood for, type 2 fun.
I think there are. I'm saying 10 Candles in particular, because it's not something you're just gonna whip out on the table. Like it's gonna be planned. Like there's horror movies definitely fall into this type 2 fun. Some people, that's their type 1 fun, but there is it's like the Saw movies. It's like, is that really like, you're looking for the emotional reactions of, like Friday the 13th, or like some of these other, like some of these campier movies are fun in their own way.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Right. But like watching like the Saw movies where these people are getting tortured.
Right.
Like I'm sure there are people out there that enjoy them. They've made 10 of the stupid things or more. I don't quite understand how that's still going, even though the guy died like 2 or 3 times ago. Uh, Um, but there's definitely like a I think type 2, you're looking for an emotional reaction that is not just like I
Right. That it's not
I've got new loot.
Raccoon Sky Pirates, or it's not the kind of bubbly, happy fun that, yeah.
Right. There are many like it's people that go mudding or whatever, like these mud racers.
Oh,
Hmm?
uh, yeah. I think you're right about the other type of fun though. The like power fantasy grind up one like tier of better gear, better levels, right? You mentioned that previously. But there's a certain kind of fun in, Diablo style, click on the thing and get better, right? Get better gear, do better, right? But I think I'm with you when you said you were kind of burned out on that kind of.
Yeah, I think I realized this quite some time ago. It's like I don't I don't have a reaction to like I mean, I'm sure I do in some level there, call it just like, "Oh, I got another level." Like, well, whoopee, like I don't I or I got a new sword or whatever. That's cool, but like if it like had this, I was my sword that I accidentally killed one of my uh, close friends now, and that they now inhabit that sword, and now I have an emotional attachment and conversation with that sword. You know, that is vastly more interesting. I'm not burned out on that, right? I'm burned out on like, hey, so we're just gonna like try and get as much gold as possible. Like
Right.
that can be fun, but it's all about the camaraderie ship, and for me anymore, it's really difficult to be excited about that sort of thing.
Yeah, I agree with you there. Like I think any game that kind of can elicit a weird emotional response in me, like that's pretty unusual, right? Uh and there are positive versions of that, like there are games like Starcrossed or whatever. I mean, although Starcrossed does bend towards tragedy, um, because you are uh, you know, lovers,
Tragic
fated,
lovers.
tragic lovers, right? Yeah, you really shouldn't be together, and the game is not joking about the fact that you shouldn't be together, right? Like, uh, it's not just that oh, it would look bad or whatever. There's like real social consequences and uh, real world consequences for whatever. Um, there, so unless you do very, very, very well in the Jenga game, it does bend towards tragedy also. Um, but yeah, sometimes games like 10 Candles that are just like, when you're getting there, like it's going to be, it's going to be a grinding, like hopeless tragedy. Like everything you love is going to die. And like, uh,
But
yeah, that's tough to sign up for, right? I don't know.
it is tough to sign up for, but I think it's one of those things where like everything that's in tabletop up to a certain point, and maybe Call of Cthulhu might be the first version of this,
Mhm.
is designed as a power fantasy, as a you're spiraling upwards, right? That there is a um you can get to the summit, but it it belies like sometimes the highest peaks are after the lowest valleys, the highest peaks
Mhm.
feel better, right? You if you if you get have some it it makes the story more alive in my opinion if you have something like that, or if you can if you know what's going on, you can kind of lean into it and really try to put yourself in that headspace, which is what I did with 10 Candles when I was playing it, because it's like when you're like, okay, so everybody like talks about when they write their backstory, like, or if they even almost nobody really writes backstories anymore, but like, not giving the game master too many hooks to allow them to like pull the family out of it, to like dangle in front, and the evil
Right.
manipulator, but like in
Everyone's an orphan loner.
right,
Yeah.
I don't care about anything, I just want to get some gold, like, yeah,
Yeah.
okay, that it's not that much, not very interesting anymore. And like, yes, I think everybody should, when they're playing, ostensibly Dungeons and Dragons or something like that, that they should have these connections to the world, that I think it makes it richer if the game master is able to use those. But like in a game where these things are going to happen, like we were playing, I think the opening was like, we were in a mall and we were relatively safe, but like things were happening, and I was like a high school kid who had a high school girlfriend, and we didn't know where that was going, and it turns out that like we find her at the army base where everybody got, evacuated to, and then of course she gets killed, and it's just like, and then like, spoilers for 10 Candles, there's a recording at the beginning as your character. Well, after everything is over, you listen to it again, and it's very impactful the way that ends up happening.
Mhm.
It's just, it's an amazing, chilling feeling. And the other part of type 2 fun in role playing games is bleed, is the emotions kind of don't end when the game is over, right? And that's,
Right.
to me, even more rare than just having emotions actually connecting between the
Yeah, when you're
characters.
still thinking about the game the next day, you're like, man, like, no.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, I had to go home and hug my wife after that game. Like, that
Yeah.
was
Yeah, yeah. And anytime a game elicits an emotional reaction like that, I think that's some form of like artistic triumph, right? Like that's something, someone's achieved something there, right? They've, designed this experience for you and you've had it and you're like, and it worked, right? Like uh that's not a guaranteed thing in game design, right?
no, it's not, and it's very difficult to um without basically doing, is like, okay, there's a disaster. This is, what are we? It's like the first they came, right? That
Mhm.
particular RPG that we reviewed last year,
Ah,
about
yes.
the Nazis coming for the people in the attic. Like, that is straight up trying to do a type 2 fun. It's
Hmm.
the only explanation, but it doesn't work. Like, it is,
Right.
and it
Right.
for very obvious reasons it doesn't work. It is a terrible example of a way of doing that. And it is like, it's going from those like hikers in the woods to people that actually experience a real natural disaster, right? There's
A real
like,
human disaster, yeah.
yeah,
Right.
like yeah,
A real human tragedy, yeah.
real human tragedy, right? Is like, no one is saying that that's fun, nor is it fun to play those people. Like,
Yeah. The old ladies you meet at Jewish community centers and tell you about the Holocaust are not like telling you it was type 2 fun, right? Like, yeah.
yeah, and we're just kind of like, and that's the balance. And that's the balance with dealing with, and I think that's one of the reasons you don't see a lot of historical, at least relatively recent based RPGs, is because it's like, well, it's like a RPG about Vietnam, like the American Vietnam conflict.
Right.
Like there are, but they're mostly lean into the archetype of the, Vietnam War movie
Right.
after that. Like,
Or
don't,
they, throw some nerd crap on top of it and do, Fall of Delta Green kind
right. Fall of Delta Green being the example I was going to go to. Thank you, Nolan, for transit.
of.
um But yeah, it is like, but it still can have that, like, it can have those Apocalypse Now moments
Hmm.
in it because it has that like attached to it. But you can't, you know, you can't just put Colonel Kurtz in there and play as one of the cultists of Colonel Kurtz and think that's going to be fun. Like you,
Right.
it's just not.
Yeah. Your other mention of like dark history and whatever, and that's probably not type 2 fun. Like I think that's related to some, this is another topic we'll get to some other day, right? But you know, I always have questions about how to like deal with RPGs that want to talk about like the stories of uh, oppressed people and minorities and so forth. And I don't know how to see that because like if I want to, like on one hand, like if I take it in good faith, like they want to see it, then I kind of maybe I feel like I'm just like a tourist, like playing this game of their experience. And I don't want to do it wrong, but on the other hand, like they publish this thing, they want their narratives and their stories like out in the world, and I like am always very going back and forth in my head between these two things, but that's a bigger story for another episode. But related to what you said about historical tragedies and whatever, we don't usually RPG that, but another type 2 fun type game, right, that came early in the so-called story game movement was Steal Away Jordan, right, which is like an RPG designed to do like slave narratives and escape slave narratives and that kind of uh, thing. And that's always when I've been like, man, I don't know how I would approach this game because it's like both like a type 2 kind of like we're going to tell a terrible tragedy here, and it's like this terrible historical time, and like what? Oh my, like I don't know how to approach those. So that's
Yeah, that is a very difficult subject, and we've talked somewhat about it in other episodes, but
mhm.
I think that like it's one of those things where what can you what are you trying to get out of a game, right? And in some ways, like in some games were written by the author just to deal with whatever that is, right? That I mean, yes, they were meant to be played, um, but there is like a, well, I mean, it would be interesting, but it is from like,
Sometimes the writer just has to write it to get it out of.
right,
It's
yeah. Well,
a way of expelling it from themselves or whatever. Yeah.
right, and in some ways, like I'm gonna say, Dogs in the Vineyard, right?
Mhm.
Someone was he was trying to deal with his upbringing in that space, and but setting it, in a historical situation, right? But
For
it's
the for those that might not be familiar, Dogs in the Vineyard is Vincent Baker's like part of his attempt to deal with his like Mormon upbringing and
right.
like strong religious Mormon upbringing.
And he's mostly said, well, I'm not gonna publish that again. That's really, that was a thing I did.
Yeah,
And
that was yeah, he's you can no longer buy it. He that was his thing he was dealing with when he wrote it, and like he sold it for a while and it did quite well and was you know uh well received critically and so forth. But he's like, yeah, I don't think it's necessarily good to be attacking my former religion in this way, and like they're earnest people who believe this, and I yeah, he's kind of
right.
backed away from it, right?
And
But he needed to write it, right?
yes, he needed to write it, and in some ways, there are some games that are, better left just read, and it's there are games that like we always talk about Bluebeard's Bride,
Mhm.
right? And that was Paul was going to run Bluebeard's Bride in another week, and I'm
Yep.
very interested to see. And I think it's written in such a way that as long as you have good, and this is, I think, the answer to all this is if you have good intentions
Mhm.
And as long as you're not like, as long as the game
Okay,
itself has good intentions.
right. If the game has good intentions and you approach it with good intentions, you're probably going to fuck up and use some stereotypes and tropes that society has plugged into your brain and you can't escape. And you probably shouldn't be doing that. But if you're doing it with good intentions, like, yeah, I think you should be forgiven for going forward with that. I think that's
But as long as and it makes you think about
right.
those situations, right? If you, after you play something like that and you go, that was odd. Maybe we shouldn't have done that. You
Right.
know,
Yeah.
and there is those kinds of situations can happen in a lot of games, even games that are not written that way. So, um, well, I mean, it's heck, how many games of Dungeons and Dragons have been like, I'm going to imprison my uh, heroes first all, so they have to escape a prison like right
Right.
away, right? That is somewhat very very blind a little bit to think of, to, that they, that they're just, you're just randomly imprisoning them. They did, whether they did something, and whether you're dealing with the actual realities of prison, or you're just trying to run the escape the power fantasy of escaping from prison from an
Right.
oppressive
The, yeah.
situation.
Or running the Great Escape or whatever. Yeah.
Right.
Like,
Exactly. Or you're just trying to get to the beginning of the Dirty Dozen or some other,
yeah.
like, yeah, I think that's, at least from the people that I like read that tend to make these kind of games, like Chris Spivey and uh, Mark Diaz Truman. They both, these guys say, okay, yes, these are not your experiences, but as long as you have the good intentions, and you can have some interesting experiences that can make things have a you can have some type 2 fun being a, cartel, being a gangster,
Hmm.
you know but it's hard to say that about Bluebeard's Bride.
Right. Yeah. And yeah,
um
my first, yeah, but specifically for that reason, like I bought the fancy, from the Kickstarter Bluebird's Bride kit, but the very first time I played it was, Kayla was our GM, and I was like, okay, good. Like this is, she will, you know, control the, feminine horror of this, and I will be the, recipient of that and like understand like better, right?
well, it's like Velvet Glove,
Yeah,
right? Velvet Glove is, female gangs dealing with male oppression,
right.
right? But it's
Uh,
kind of coded more in the kind
Similar
of
with Night Witches, right?
the
Like
warriors, right? Yeah, Night Witches, like
also, yeah, one of the moves is like act up, and not, don't don't act like, yeah.
I mean,
Uh,
someday I would
Night
like to
Witches,
play Haunted West, but
yeah,
first
Night
I need
Witches
to get a
is
degree in Western history by reading the book first.
yes. For those that don't know, Night Witches, yeah, is this RPG about the Soviet women in World War II who were given, old World War I era like planes and told like go kill some Nazis. We're out of like bombs. Here, take a railroad tie and drop it on German position from a crappy old World War One. You know, but they would, kill the engines before they went over, uh, and just glide over the German camps. So the Germans called them Noctex and Night Witches. Like and Haunted West is Chris Spivey's, story about uh, people of color in the Old West, like very, very cool stuff, man. Hometown DC boy, yeah.
Right. And it's some really cool stuff. And I think, there is, like playing even Vampire the Masquerade. Yes, there are power fantasies to be had in there, but there's a lot of terrible stuff that you
Mhm.
do and other people do to you
Yeah,
in Vampire the Masquerade, right? Drama.
that's true. people play vampire like a couple different ways, right? Some people play it as basically, the Matrix, right? Superheroes in black trench coats, goth superheroes, right? And like, oh yeah, I go get some blood or whatever. And various editions of Vampire have dealt with this varying levels of sensitivity, but some of them are like actually deal with the fact that like, no, this is a terrible thing you're doing. Like you have to like
You're
kill people.
monsters. You are
Yeah,
monsters, and you're doing terrible things to
right,
try and survive. Because even the monsters, even the immortal monsters, still need to do these
right,
terrible things, right?
right,
So there is different ways of. I mean, you can play D&D like it's a type 2 fun where you're just you're trying to simulate like a march through a wilderness, right?
I mean,
That
peasant funnels might a little bit be that, right? In like
is a,
OSR style game.
I think it's
Like
a little more
it's a
DCC
little more
fun.
campy when you do a peasant funnel, right? When you're
Yeah,
like, ah ha ha, these guys are all gonna die and I've got 6 of them, like
it's a little more splatter fun. It is. I think
yeah.
it's more type 1 fun than type 2
Yeah.
fun.
It's
But
more like you were mentioning those like, you know, 50s B movies and 80s, campy horror movies, right? Where it's like,
it's like
yeah, something bad's gonna happen, but like we're all in it to have fun, type 1 fun a little bit, right? Like we're gonna laugh at it as it happens, right?
exactly. So like I think a lot of games can be played in both modes, or even I'll call it type 3 unfun, where you're basically kind of like you're disaster touristing. I just want to separate that part out of type 2 because like
Right,
I feel like it's important to talk about in the context of role playing games is like yeah, there's a third type of unfun
right.
that is like on the spectrum or whatever.
Where like, yeah, you're getting your emotional catharsis and whatever by like playing out somebody else's tragedy. Yeah, like that's a little questionable.
Yes, and that is the line you walk when you play some of these games. And that's I am glad that the hobby has matured enough to start having more interesting games that are attempting to do more different emotions. I mean, that we've always had that, but it just seems like there's kind of a whole genre of different like style of games. Like trying to emulate drama is now more of a thing than it has ever been
Right.
before.
And I am 1000% with you on that. Like, um, I've been playing stupid elf games, right, since whatever, 1994, whenever I first played my first game of second ed, right? Sometime around 94. Um, and yeah, if the only type of fun available was, oh, I level up, I get a new magic sword, like I would not still be playing this decades I would not still be playing these games decades later. The fact that these new types of, fun and new experiences and new, games that can elicit different emotions are around, like, yeah, that's kept it fresh and interesting, and that keeps me still loving this hobby, right? I think that's very important.
I mean, heck we were playing The Between, right?
Yep, I ran some between. Yep.
And that we were very
Speaking of
much
scheduling problems,
speaking of scheduling problems
I had to fill in the between with between our.
in between. Yeah, that's gonna be hilarious. So we should just okay, it's an in between night.
Yeah,
It's a
exactly.
and it was very much a gothic story,
Yeah,
ghost story,
Victorian. Yeah, kind of gothic.
right? And that sort of like looking into that past is sort of in that type 2 fun thing. Like we weren't like beating up a bad guy or like chasing serial killers down or you know whatever you want to call type 1 fun.
Right. Yeah. It has I do like it too. It's got a like pacing mechanic in the beginning where it's like okay, the day phase is supposed to be slower and you get some time to breathe with these characters, and then the night phase is more frenetic, and like that's when all the crazy terrible shit happens to you. Like yeah, it was interesting, right? And yeah, that's the kind of thing that keeps you, different kinds of fun, different kinds of emotional experiences. uh just to fill people in between is the Brindlewood Bay kind of based Victorian monster hunters. You're these weird Victorian people that hunt vampires in a gritty
Well,
London.
you're not necessarily vampire hunters. You're
Yeah,
mystery
sure. Yeah,
solvers. Think of
yeah, you're
League
mystery
of
solvers.
League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. Or Penny Dreadful is the actual
Penny Dreadful is the main. Yeah, if you've
right.
seen that
But
on.
and since this may come out the week of Halloween ish, you could very quickly digest that game and run it very quickly.
Right. And that was why I had it prepped for filling in the schedule. Is like my local group here is going to have a October whatever next weekend, and I was prepping Penny Dreadful for Halloween, and then we had a gap in our schedule, and I plugged my shit in, right? Like,
Right, but it is good to, like, if you're gonna, it's nice that if you can run something, you can run it like multiple, at least once before with a more,
yeah,
a group, right? That's like a bit more. I think running it for our more advanced group first to kind of work out some of the bugs
yeah,
is quite handy. So
yeah. I always like to run something before, especially before I do things like a con or whatever. But yeah,
So, okay, well, this rambling rant of a thing may or may not see light of day, but it'll see the Patreon. So,
yeah,
at some point, I appreciate the patrons. I appreciate you as even a listener. If you have a chance, please, hey, give us a rating if you think this is interesting. I've been sort of toying with what to do with this show. So if you think that this show is worth fighting for, go ahead and fight for it with a rating somewhere you can rate things and send it to me. Even if you do it so anonymously over the internet. And I I think oh, and if you love podcasts, I highly recommend picking up Diogo Nogueira's new Weird Games and Weirder People podcast. We'll have Diogo on pretty soon, I think. So
yeah. I'm almost current on it, and it's good stuff. It's weird in all the best ways.
it's weird and intimate with it's a him talking to one other person in a great interview style. I really enjoy it. And hey, I probably be on there at some point in the future. So anyways, thanks everybody.